I'll let the office know that. Yep, so if you're looking at the big clock, know that it's a couple minutes slow. It may not pertain to the ending, it might give us a couple more minutes. Welcome. We're glad to have Pastor Gordon and Lois with us today. They probably really don't need much of an introduction to each of you, so I'll just say, Pastor Gordon, go for it.
Thank you. Good morning, everyone. It's really good to be able to spend an adult ed session with you. I don't always get to do that very often. And to be talking about this topic, which we put on the calendar this summer with some discussions with Justice and Reconciliation Ministry and Consistory, that it's just important as a community that we keep wrestling with these issues. And so I put down the title of this session as Partisan and Political, Party and Policy. Wasn't sure what I was going to talk about, but probably thought that would give some things to talk about. But then as I was thinking about it, I thought, well, let's just go with the alliteration, partisan and political and party and policy and politician and president and prophetic, right? These are all the things that we are aware of and people are interacting with as citizens, as Christians. But why would we want to have a session like that today? I think it's a pastoral issue for us, for Gretchen and I, for Gretchen and Jackson and I as pastors. We hear folks talking about these things a lot. What this means in our time to address these issues. We hear people contacting the Justice and Reconciliation Ministry with lots of materials, lots of ideas about how to engage. We have conversations with you. We hear you having conversations with each other and see things that you're involved in. And as we listen, we had a gathering last spring in the chapel. People send things in. These are some of the things that we hear. It's the real deal. People talk about demonization of diversity, equity, and inclusion, threat to education, movement to authoritarianism or fascism through executive orders, voter disenfranchisement, suppression of news sources, issues in Gaza and Israel, Ukraine and Russia, environmental policy, regression, silencing of voices of people of color and women, normalization of vitriol, division of communities, families, Christian nationalism, undermining the role of law, legitimizing profiling, assault on higher ed and science, ICE's behavior and covering of ICE's faces, government intimidation of judges. You've got to take a deep breath there, right? It's a lot of stuff, and maybe those are things that you carry with you. Maybe some of those you see as not accurate characterization, or there are others you would add to the list, but it's there among us in our community, our church community, and around us. People have those concerns about what's happening politically, what's happening in the church, the impact on our neighbors and communities, concerns about the role and of Hope Church. How do we act in those times? And I think what we're trying to ask is, how are these Christian concerns? How are these church concerns, faith concerns? And I would say that what we have been holding with that is that this is a Christian concern, this is a church concern, because we are called to love of neighbor. It's one of the core callings that we're grounded in our love of God through Christ. Love God, love your neighbor. And we're seeking as Christians to be a witness to God's love through action that embodies the love of Christ to our neighbors. We've already been looking at how to engage that this fall with some really good adult ed sessions. Steve Baumer-Prediger led a couple of sessions on the Barmen Declaration out of Germany in the midst of the Third Reich, the Hitler regime, a Christian confession there. Milton Wiersma talked about resources in the U.S. Constitution. How do we receive those as a community of faith? How do those speak to our times? And when I was wondering about how to engage this time, it came to me a few weeks ago. I said, I think I know what a good thing would do. Let's talk about the Belhar. I think the Belhar Confession is a really important resource for us in our time, in our Christian communion. Some of you are very familiar with it, others less so. We're going to explore that today, and that's what you have copies of. It came out of South Africa in 1968, and then it was adopted by a confession in the Reformed Church in America in 2010. And so the Belhar Confession is a theological statement written by the Dutch Reformed Mission Church, which was the black church there. That was the church established by the white South Africans for the black community. And this was done in the context of a church-state conflation in theology and policy. That was under the structure of apartheid. That was a racial, religious, political, economic structure separation. And it was supported both by a theological framework. Apartheid was a theological statement that this is how people should be. They should be divided. And it was a political statement. There were laws that were based on the policy of apartheid. So the Belhar Confession is a reformed confession. It's something in our community. And it's written from one part of the church to the other, primarily, from the black church and the colored church to the white church. And it's really a wrestling in their time of what it means to be reformed in their setting. The Belhar was written as a prophetic Christian witness, both to the church and to the state, to church and politics. And it spoke in ways that in that time were both illegal and heretical. They said the races should be together. That was illegal according to South African law. And that was heretical according to the theological argument for apartheid that the white church had made. It's really fascinating to see how it spoke to that conflation, but it was saying things that were against the majority political and church stance. Now, I want to give a spoiler alert here. The Belhar Confession did not solve everything in South Africa. If we look at South Africa today, there are still deep political, religious, economic problems. But the Belhar did catalyze major changes in that time for the better. And we can draw on the content and intentions of the Belhar in our context to guide current actions and to seek enduring consequences. Not that we're going to solve it all, but what's a theological framework that we can have for how we want to engage our context. So let's take a little trip through the Belhar, a summary. A summary of the Belhar is that it has these themes, these touchstones of unity, reconciliation, and justice. And I want to look a little bit at each of those. Belhar talks about unity. It asserts this as a core theological value, and it does so in profoundly ununified circumstances. The racial, church, political, economic setting was very disunified, ununified. But in this ununified setting, the Belhar says unity is a core theological value. And the meaning of unity is not bringing people together around diverse viewpoints, but being unified in Christ to the calling of love of God and neighbor. Unity in that context is not a value which puts aside love of neighbor for the sake of harmony. It's a calling from Christ which witnesses to God's intention that all be united in beloved community. Reconciliation. You're going to see a theme here. Reconciliation is asserted as a core theological value, but that is done in profoundly unreconciled circumstances, the racial, church, political, economic environment. So when the Belhar speaks of reconciliation in this unreconciled setting, it's not first or primarily expressing resolution or agreement, but it's giving this foundation that all must be affirmed as reflecting the humanity, equality, and value given to them as children of God. That's both the starting point and the destination of reconciliation. We need to affirm that as the church, the humanity, equality, and value of all, in order to be able to talk about reconciliation. Reconciliation is God's mandate for a beloved community in which all belong. So unity, reconciliation, and justice. Justice, it's asserted as a core theological value, as you can guess, in very unjust times in the racial, church, political, economic structure. So in this unjust setting, the Belhar speaks to justice as God's intention for the world. The church must stand against injustice. The church must witness against unjust power and privilege. The church must disobey unjust laws and authorities. So justice is the theological advocacy piece of beloved community. It speaks both to church priorities and to political policies. I wanted you to look for a moment at the copy of the Belhar that I handed out to you, which has the really cool stapleless stapler. Have you noticed that we can do that now in the office? So just a little feature to show off there. It's very environmentally friendly, all the things. But this is a marked up copy for me, and what I started doing is underlining the pieces where it speaks to not just as a church issue, but that this is speaking to the world, how we engage with the world. And it just starts a little bit in the unity section between people and groups. It says we speak to that separation, not just in the church. We serve in God's world. Then in the reconciliation piece, in a world, we are the salt of the earth and the light of the world. And then when you get to that justice section and this last inside page, all through the justice section, it speaks to how we are engaging with what's happening in the world, that we speak to those who are wronged, to the oppressed, that to visit the orphans and widows is true religion. Stand by people in suffering and need. Stand against injustice. Speak against the powerful and the privileged. And then that last part, even though the authorities and human laws might forbid them, and punishment and suffering be the consequence. So it blossoms out in that last section that this is a theological discussion we're having as a church about what unity and reconciliation means, and then it has this very direct impact on we care about what's happening in the world, and we speak to that with that stance of unity and reconciliation to be a voice of justice. So the Belhar Confession, unity, reconciliation, justice, I think it's a profound theological mandate, and it's important to feel the spirit of it. If you read through it, it's one of faith in Christ. It's one of witness to the world. It's one of prophetic voice. And so then I want to talk about how we might carry that out in our context. Our context is that we are a Reformed church, in the Reformed Church America denomination. We're a predominantly white denomination and congregation. We're predominantly affluent when you look at the context of our society and world. And so we have to listen to these meanings of unity, reconciliation, and justice because they're often different than how we use them in our context. My assertion for us talking today is that we have become deeply formed by a received meaning of what separation of church and state means, and that's developed particularly in white Protestantism. The received meaning is that church and state should have no connection at all. And I think that was a reaction and overreaction to the European dangers that had happened with conflating of church and state. If you have church and state linked together, bad things are going to happen. But the impact of this received meaning is that white Protestant churches in particular came to value, they gave a Christian moral value to being not political as a badge of faith. And this was especially doable since the white majority in general benefited from the prevailing political policy. There wasn't a cost for staying out of politics. But I believe that the actual meaning of church and state was intended that the state should not compel or control the church. That's what was being addressed. That was the danger that was being addressed in the Constitution. And that in no way precludes the church from advocating to the state on policy and laws and ethics. And we can see that difference in perceived and actual meaning when we look at the profound difference with the historic black church. The black church sees engagement with political policy as an essential expression of faith because of the harmful impact of unjust laws on their community. Political engagement is an expression of love and neighbor. So if we apply that to our context, we now have the Belhar as a confession of the Reformed Church in America, 2010. I want you to know or to remember with me or to learn that that was actually a close vote in the Reformed Church. It requires a 2/3 majority, which is a significant thing to change the Constitution. This was the first time in 500 years that we were adding a confession in the Reformed Church. And the vote came out 1 vote short of 2/3. But there was a classis in Colorado, I believe the Rocky Mountain classis, but you can look that up, where someone said there had been something out of order in their vote, and they reconvened the classis, and what had been a no vote was changed to a yes vote, and then the 2/3 majority was there. So it was close, and it was very significant. I think it was a defining moment in our generation in this we're in a new century, right? In the 2000s, of shaping the witness of the Reformed Church through a Belhar lens, that this is how we are going to approach the world. And it was a time when many more conservative congregations started to see that maybe the Reformed Church wasn't a place for them, because they saw that witnessing to the world in the ways the Belhar spoke of may have some theological implications that they did not support. And I think that started to play out in what's happened in some of the separation in the Reformed Church too. So it's a difficult thing. We speak to unity and reconciliation, but it's taking a theological stand that says this is who we are going to be in our context. I want to connect that also with the civil rights movement in the 60s as a political witness of the black church. I really think that was a precursor of the Belhar. And I want us to hear now how, that was a precursor of what we see in terms of diversity, equity, and inclusion, but that's really being directly addressed and rejected by many in church and state right now. I don't know if you've heard the language using those same letters, that it's actually something that divides through exclusive ideology, right? It's trying to say that DEI is not a positive thing, it's something that's negative. So if we take these as resources for us today, in the wake, particularly a theological intersection engagement around Christian nationalism, we find that Christian nationalism is really trying to reconflate church and state. It's doing the very thing that our Constitution and that we as churches saw as a danger. It's really wanting to promote a state religion, some sort of Christianity, that I think has values of exceptionalism, authoritarianism, and dominion. Wrote a little bit about that in the Salt and Light article, but I think it's important for us to name those and engage those. So I see the Belhar Confession as a theological blueprint for our context, not partisan, which is not the support of a candidate in an election, even though the IRS says that's okay now. We can talk about that, it's there, but that's not good or wise, because to directly promote a particular candidate conflates church and state. But we do speak as Christians with a Belhar lens of unity, reconciliation, justice, to all those other things, to policy, to political party, to an elected politician, an elected president, laws, government. And we do that with a heart of witness and advocacy, that's love of neighbor, of prophetic vision, beloved community, and of hope, because we say the reign of God is among us in Christ. Lois Maassen, you may know, and she is a Christian. She is a member of Hope Church, and she is someone trying to figure out these things in our context. How do we express our faith in the public sphere? And so she's going to give a little on-the-ground sense of how she's doing that before I wrap some things up. Thank you, Lois.
So I want to first say that I am not an exemplar, I am just a case study, because there are lots of people in this room who are also doing things to try to figure this out in this room and in the broader Hope Church community. So I recognize that and applaud everyone who's engaged. I thought when we talked about me representing this, there are two things that you should know about me. One is that way back in the 80s, and I'm looking at John Barry because we have some history, when I was in corporate life and I heard people talk about office politics, and I thought, I had no idea what corporations were at that point, so I did some research. I did not redo it, so take this with a grain of salt, hold it loosely, it's the gist of it. And I learned that the roots of politics are all positive. It's really about people working together to get something done, and obviously they're getting something done that they want. And that actually helped me in my work life because I recognized that office politics was just people. And it helps me to maintain a frame about political engagement too, because politics is just people. The other thing that you see on the right there is that the Belhar Confession hangs in my dining room. That is one of the letterpress prints that some of you brought back from an RCA-sponsored anniversary trip. I think Judy Vanderwalt was on that trip with my mom. So my mom brought this back to me, and it's been hanging on my dining room wall since. So this is like an intersection of all the things.
Lois, that was produced at Greenpoint Reformed Church in Brooklyn by Earl Calamine. Woohoo!
So I had an adventure in politics last year, and after the inauguration this year, I was still kind of in a mode of looking around to say what's next for me, because I care deeply about the future of this country. My inspiration is here in the second row, and that makes me a little verklempt. But so when I looked around for organizations, I saw there are a lot of them. But I settled on Indivisible because of the vision that they have for a real democracy of, by, and for the people. This is not an organization that is focused on the current administration. It is not focused on returning to the status quo. It is really focused on the core values of democracy, which includes being a broad, multiracial, we the people. It works for all of us and is sustained by all of us. It recognizes that democracy has gotten skewed so that it works well for the white and the wealthy, and that there are alliances of people who are working to make democracy not work as intended for all of us. Indivisible is also inclusive. There are a number of organizations that were very attractive to me because they're for women. But I knew that being obviously welcoming to men as well as women was an important point. Also, the nonpartisan nature of Indivisible was important to me. And Steve, we had a bit of a conversation about that yesterday. Being nonpartisan, being perceived as nonpartisan is a challenge in an environment where one of two major parties has abandoned the Constitution. The other thing that was important to me is that the Indivisible organization is both grassroots and also action-oriented. It's really rooted in community. This summer, Indivisible introduced a strategy that they are calling 1 Million Rising, and what they're looking to do is to engage people in building the network of democracy. And this is in a time, I mean, I think maybe the last time I was speaking to you in adult ed may have been about alienation and the epidemic of loneliness in our country. And this is a time of separation among people, individualism kind of run amok. So part of the goal of the 1 Million Rising strategy is to connect people back together and to connect them in the interest of democracy and taking action for ourselves and for our community. Now, when they dug deeper into this strategy, they identified some ways in which we could all be encouraged to not cooperate with things that we don't think are consistent with our values. So they said, if we can identify these pillars in our culture, in our society, and we can work against them, then we can begin to turn our culture, our society, our democracy back in the direction that we intend. Now, when I looked at those, I thought, golly, that reminds me of something. And I know some of you were at a training class, I don't know, a year or 2 years ago on Christian nationalism, and may have heard about Seven Mountains Dominionism, which was actually originally coined in 1975. It kept rising in popularity. It didn't really get traction until about 2000, and then there was a book called Invading Babylon, The Seven Mountain Mandate, which was published in 2013. There was a conflation with conservative politics, and that really became a strategy for Christian nationalists and the far right. So we in Indivisible Holland Zealand have adopted the Mountains of Christian Nationalism as a framework for our action planning, and we recognize that there are 3 ways to confront any or support any of those pillars. We can protest when things are not what we believe they need to be. When things are wrong, we can say so. We can also affirm and support the positive, so writing letters to our congresspeople when they are standing firmly for the rights of citizens or for feeding children or a long list of other things. And then we can also be alert to people who are being harmed by what's happening, and we can provide aid to them. So when we put this together, I'm an INTJ and I love a matrix, but the columns down the left and the three approaches across the top suggest ways that we can engage, because what is important to us is not that we all do the same thing, because we're not all the same people, but that we encourage as many people as possible to do something. So some examples of this, I mean, in government, we did a little protest yesterday. In affirmation, we have done postcard campaigns in thanking our senators for standing up for democratic principles. We have, in the family category, we have participated in the crop walk to raise money and awareness of food security issues in our community. We have educated about the media so that we can provide support to media that is representing what's happening honestly and truthfully, and we can also be aware when we need to second guess sources that we're reading. So this has been a canvas for our actions, and I realize that it is also a canvas for me personally in living out my faith, that my faith is not just a Sunday morning thing. It comes into play, influences what I do and say in all of these categories. So this is a part of the strategy that we in Holland Zealand Indivisible are calling Let 1,000 Flowers Grow, because what we're talking about is inspiring action everywhere of many kinds, and hoping to connect people in community through that action. And then finally, I don't know how many of you read Richard Rohr's daily emails. Lots, probably. There was, this was like 2 days, the day after, maybe the day that Gordon and I colluded about this presentation. And this essay was about our cultural picture of Jesus as being loving and kind and welcoming, and how often we forget that Jesus was sometimes angry, and Jesus challenged the status quo with his whole life. So it was a reminder to me that sometimes love is strident, and sometimes love is angry, and sometimes anger is righteous.
Thank you so much, Lois. When a couple weeks ago, Lois mentioned to me, would you be interested in me helping you out with leading the October 19 session? I said, yes, please. And I said, oh, yes, let's think about that, Lois, if that would be a good idea. Because I know and appreciate, respect Lois so much, but what Lois said about a case study of someone who is a part of our community is trying to work out how to work these things out is something that we're all doing in our lives. And so it meant so much to me that Lois could share that, and I know people involved in different ways. And that what I wanted to do is find a way for us in the different ways that we're talking. We need theological grounding. We need theological lenses and nourishment for this. And that's what I saw the Belhar giving and being lived out in a case study like Lois's. So what I want to bring this together by, as we lead into some discussion, is to ask, what have we been talking about here today? And what I believe we have been talking about is very good Reformed theology. Reformed theology is the assertion, the belief that all realms of life are connected to and expressions of our faith. That who we are in all of our interactions, in all of our relationships, and all of our callings, those are expressions of faith. Reformed theology expresses that God's grace in Christ is the witness of the church, not the possession of the church. We do not have a corner on God's grace. Instead, we seek to have God's grace be a blessing for all. It's not love of own, it's love of neighbor. And it's this assertion that the reign of God is meant for the present, not just the future. Our lives belong to God in life and death, in life after death. A profound witness of the Reformed theology is hearing the words of Christ, the kingdom of God is among us, the reign of God is with us. And how do we witness to, and how are we a part of forming that reign of God as followers of Jesus Christ? I believe that we've been talking about Micah 6:8. Which is an essential touchstone verse for this congregation as we've listened to our calling. To do justice. The Belhar says justice is the expression of God's heart for the world. To love kindness. The Belhar says reconciliation is the heart of God's people. We will always value the humanity and dignity of all, including those who we perceive against acting against love of neighbor. That always at the core is what why we care about this is the humanity and dignity of all. And we walk humbly with God. Unity is the purpose of God's people, the Belhar says. Our witness is not about being better than others, but about witnessing to paths that join all in God's abundance. The Belhar Confession spoke to Reformed Christians in South Africa at a very turbulent time with a spirit of prophetic justice, genuine love, and humble trust in God's abundance for all. And I believe the Belhar can guide us to do the same. And as we do that, the last thing I want to say is not just about what have we been talking about, but how do we talk about things. And I want to bring up the fruits of the Spirit. Some of you may be familiar with the work of the Colossians Forum, is it? What is it called? Yeah, Colossians Forum. And that's a Christian organization that has come together around helping faith communities in particular to talk about challenging issues. There's some of their work that resonates with me, others that I would want to engage with in a little bit different way. But one of the things I read from there a while ago was so meaningful to me, I think in some good evangelical Christian terms, we would say was convicting to me. So when I heard it, I was like, oh. And they said, everything we do needs to express and contain the fruits of the Spirit. And I said, oh, shucks, I think that's true. And right, that is essential to, it's woven into everything that we witness to, that we advocate for, that love, joy, peace, patience, kindness, goodness, gentleness, faithfulness, gentleness, self-control, that those are who we are as we witness to unity, reconciliation, and justice, to these theological Reformed theology touchstones. So I want to offer that as a guide, an accountability, a gift to us as a community as well as we engage with these issues. So we started with partisan and political, party and policy, politician and president and prophetic. And the only one I'm going to take out of there is partisan, because I do think that we speak to all those other realms as places when we want to seek to be faithful, because those impact the love of neighbor to which God calls us. So that's our offering for you today. The Belhar is a unity to witness, to belonging for all. Reconciliation as a witness to humanity of all, and justice as a witness to beloved community for all, done as people who follow that calling and who have the fruits of the Spirit among us. Preach it, Gordy. Amen. Thank you. We left some time for some discussion and questions, and do the best we can.
When I came to this meeting this morning, I did not expect it to be a race issue meeting. And although I think that is very important, I'll have to admit that during this past week, when I have not been home all the time, I don't recall having seen one black person. I have in the past had black people in my home as overnight guests and as dinner guests. How many of you have done that? And but I think that at this time in our country's life, that we have far more important things to address first. We are at the verge of war. Don't think we're not. When our president can bomb boats which he feels are carrying drugs and really and truly murder people, and also go into Iran and bomb things, what do we expect? We're in trouble, and we have to address that kind of trouble first, I think.
I hear the passion of what you're expressing, Lois, and putting that out there. I think I see that as a both and that there are different ways, different times in our community that we're connected to different parts of what it means to live that out. I think Kathy had her hand up first, Barbara.
What I'm interested in mostly is how you determine what is too partisan for the church to promote, because it seems to me like most of what is, I think is partisan is allowed. So what does the church, consistory, or you and Pastor G decide is too partisan? How do you make that determination?
Thanks, Kathy. I think it's really challenging, and I don't mean that as a cop-out, but it has to be done in community. It's done calling on our history as a congregation, what we felt the Spirit calling us to. It's the guidance of the consistory, the pastors in collaboration with them, listening to what's on the hearts and minds of our community. And I think I find it to be a brave new world, not trying to make connections of, it's a challenge for me in a different way as a pastor now. And I feel myself learning too. And that to speak about what a politician is doing, what an elected official doing, is not a partisan action. If you're talking about the actions of that person, the policy of that person, to speak what's happening in an administration, to speak what's happening in part of our government. If we are speaking to the impact of those in our communities, in our nation, that's what we are to do. And there's such, I think, a strong recovering that's been dampened by this badge of honor to not be political, that we really need to talk about this as a community. What we're talking about is love of neighbor. We want that to be our guide, and when we see things impacted by that, then we give a voice that we believe is distinctly Christian, distinctly Reformed, that our love of neighbor is impacted in all those areas.
So just following up a little bit and building on Kathy's question, what you've got me thinking about during this very fine presentation is what does it mean for the church to speak to the state, and who should be doing that, which you say we can do without violating separation of church and state. Yeah. The moral majority certainly agreed with you on that. Christian nationalism agrees with you on that. Is the difference that they would tend to advocate, they would become partisan by advocating a particular candidate or party, and that's something that we're going to steer clear of. But when the issues that really energize us and we think are biblically rooted values and concerns happen to align with one side, it becomes kind of difficult. It's a very tough edge, isn't it, for us to navigate? And I imagine that must be a challenge for you as a pastor.
Yeah, we have to listen to that in a context in which Democrat and Republican are very much the primary identifications. I think it is a challenge for us to give a distinctly Christian witness and to say that's who we are. We're not Democrats, we're not Republicans as a church, but what's our distinctly Christian witness? And I do things that are absolutely the moral majority, what was that? Was that 70s or 80s Christian nationalist folks would agree with us on many things. I really do believe the end point, though, makes a difference. And it's there that speaking of this as a Christian nation, speaking of this as a place that has exceptionalism, dominion over others, I think that has consequences for love of neighbor, and it's theologically not something that we believe as Reformed Christians. You know, when we, as a church, helped to advocate for the human rights ordinance in Holland in early 2000s, maybe it took in the 2010s or so, right? That's a congregation speaking to policy of our city, of elected officials, about what we believe impacts the love of neighbor. And that's a Christian witness that we made. That was that, and we united churches, we invited people of goodwill of all sorts. And so it's not a new thing. It's something that we do, but we have to discern as a congregation, as a community, how we do that. How that's playing out now, David, absolutely. I feel the energy of it. I feel the consequences of it. And there's something that's grounding, and I think we're learning about how to, we have been perceived as partisan. How can we express our care about our community in a distinctly Christian witness way that we believe will be compelling and fruitful for our community? Yeah.
So we are all humans, and humans have this ability to go off the rails. And political parties can go off the rails. And when we speak to our values and our beliefs as Christians, because they have gone off the rails and they are, we believe, damaging what we value in humans in God's message to us, then we can appear partisan. I think you have to separate out, are we being partisan, or are the issues that we're addressing, because they are the product of one political party, in this case the Republican Party, that they attack those values and harm people, and we feel called to stand with those people and advocate for a different approach to solving our community issues. And the example I would give is Lyndon Johnson and the Vietnam War. Churches struggled over that, and at that time, churches could be perceived as being partisan.
Yeah.
They were attacking the Democratic Party when in fact they were speaking to the value of humanity and the inappropriateness of what we believed our country's actions in that war. So in that case, it would be on the other side. They
There's a
weren't
whole
partisan.
continuity of those issues, and I resonate with much of what you say, Bob, and we have to listen to how we're being perceived too. And I think that we have work to do as a Christian community around those fruits of the Spirit. We have work to do around speaking to policies rather than people. We have work to do of valuing the humanity of all, of not coming off as superior or vindictive. And it's a both and, right, as we're doing those things, but we need to listen to the perceptions that are there and what do we need to lean into about how we express our heart as Christians, something distinctly Christian.
Yeah, so I'd just like to tag onto that. And I did marital therapy for many years, and David and I had a discussion about this some months ago. The devil's in the details of our internal process, our mental process. And I think there's an individual to sort how we are relating in our own minds to other people who oppose what we believe within the Christian community as well as beyond the Christian community. Then there's the interpersonal process, and you brought up Colossians 4, and I'm not familiar with that organization.
Forum.
Yes.
F-O-R-U-M, Forum.
A forum, okay.
Yeah.
And so I would like to get to know them more.
Yeah.
But I guess what I'm just trying to get at here is I think the enormous challenge, and I'm looking for people within Hope to be able to practice community with, where we can get together, because the greater our passion, the greater our righteous indignation, our anger is. And I think we tend to either stuff it or we're not good at managing it. And it's the energy of protest. We need the voice of protest. But we need to do that through a conduit that's really well managed and mature and effective. So how can we do that? I think we need to practice with each other in this church, and I would love to be a part of that.
Thank you, Jim. And let me say a moment, David, it made me think, and part of it maybe as we try to connect about things is there's a lot of different viewpoints in Hope Church. I don't know if you all know that about yourselves, that we hear that as pastors, as consistory, as ministries on specific issues, right? How far do we go? What do we address? What do we say about international issues? How do we approach those? What about policies of our government? There's a whole lot of diversity of opinion, and if we can listen to one another in that and say, what is our heart? What are we intending? Let's talk about this, how this impacts our neighbors, love of neighbors, and let's talk about how this is a witness too, right? This is a witness of the fruits of the Spirit, of gratitude, of seeking beloved community. And I think that there's something that will be bigger than just speaking to a particular issue when we have that heart with it.
For many decades, the U.S. conversation within churches has been, we can't talk about that or we lose our tax-exempt status.
Yeah.
You made mention of it earlier. Just say a brief word of what you think has changed there, and is how much of an issue is that for us now?
Yeah, it's my, I think, informed, but there's people with a lot more research things than that. When I tried to assert that piece about this sort of received meaning of separation in church and state, and then that I don't think that's accurate, and how it's different in the black church. I think the whole thing of we're going to get our tax exempt taken away just wasn't the case, right? To speak to political issues is what churches, religious movements, all sorts of people were doing all the time. It was very important not to cross that partisan line. That's not just realistic. There's things at stake there that are important. Churches often did, I think, in ways that were less than subtle. But I think what we're finding is literally leaning into, as Bob pointed out, the issues that have been there, that we can engage with these issues in our world, and we're trying to do that with what our understanding of a distinctively Christian witness is. And now the IRS says it's okay, and we say what's okay and what's wise are two different things, and that's what we're trying to sort through. Yeah.
I wanted to thank Lois for just such a great summary of what motivates you, but many of us, and to say, I think politics is one of the highest callings. I was going to say the highest, and I thought, oh, really can't say that with Gordon.
You go for it. Amen. I'm but a humble preacher.
But, you know, putting yourself out there and asking for people's votes.
Yeah.
But what I took pages of notes, but what I really liked was, for me, we're free to say what we want, mostly still. Yesterday was fabulous, but when Lois said, love can lead to anger, I thought, yes. I mean, I totally agree with that. And anger can then turn toward righteous justice and indignation and moving to Washington, D.C., or wherever your passion takes us. So Lois, I thought that was great. And what you have done and run for office, congratulations.
Yeah. And I'm going to keep us, since we talked about Lois, who's one of the people who taught me about, well, first of all, amen to what Barbara said, and then about polarities, right? Yeah, there's a time for talking about love is anger, it leads us to action, and then we have to say, I'm starting to believe in tri and quadlarities rather than just polarities, all the things. Love is patient, love is kind, love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things. God is love. If we say God is love, we don't say God is anger. Obviously, that has to be a part of God's righteous indignation. But always keep those things in connection, in relationship, interaction with one another. And that's part of why we need community, right? If David is angry about something, I can say, let's be patient and realize that's not backing off, but that's going for the long haul. If I say, hey, let's go for it, then someone says, hey, Pastor Gordon, love is kind, right? So all those things, right? We need community, and that's how the fruits of the Spirit work among us. None of those things are given in the singular; they're all given in the plural. Roger.
Okay.
You're good.
Yeah. Good morning. I'm a visitor.
Welcome. You're good. Just keep it close to your mouth there.
You can't go up any further, can you?
Okay. Sorry. Okay. I'm a visitor, not from Michigan. Pleased with both presentations. Thank you very much. Yesterday, I happened to be in Charlevoix and saw a poster that summarizes an increasing challenge for me: fight truth decay. And the challenge that's puzzling me is I have trouble addressing and discussing with people who seem to promote the untruth, who are not concerned with facts, and my background's in science, and there's so many issues where it seems as though the truth doesn't matter anymore. So I wondered if you might just address that.
I think I am in a different sort of way. I'm going to say I don't know quite how to address that. I think it's very disorienting for many of us right now, what that means to sort out how do you have a common place for conversation. I want to address it pastorally, that I know this is really hard in a lot of families and relationships, and we need community for that too. Maybe you need to back off a little bit just for the sake of family. I don't know, but if you do that, then we're with you and we're praying for you. You're deciding those relationships are things that you need to do. Maybe you're needing to push in and say, I can have love in my family and talk about difficult things. That's not right. That's not one person copping out and another person leaning in. That's you discerning, and let's talk about that. Because there's some very painful things. And it's always going to be different things that are going on, our individual, our family relationships, what's happening in our community. But when we go back to the Belhar, that was really tough stuff, right? That was dividing people and families and neighborhoods, and children were born of a white and a black person, and that person was illegal. Right? So there have been communities and times that have addressed this, and so I ask for a recognition among ourselves of how this is very difficult, how we have the resources to face difficult things, but for you pastorally with yourself and listening to the Spirit of your faith to find a way that's gonna be different for each of us. Jane. Oh, yeah, we got someone here.
Yeah.
Vicky.
I've read some commentary that I kind of agree with that kind of calls out the church for not speaking out more, especially as a unified group, and especially to some of the key things like love your neighbor as yourself. But why there isn't a unified statement being made, whether that's, locally with the Holland churches or just nationwide, it just made me think, some of these basic things we truly all agree on. But we're like, we got the class here, we're maybe speaking to a neighbor, we do a great protest yesterday, but not the church as a whole speaking out.
I know. It's one of the if I think about someone looking at the church, what is the church about? I think it's one of the, I don't know if scandal is like that theological scandal idea, right? That we as a church can't speak in a unified way. It's part of the dynamic of Christendom, that there's so much difference and division that's there. And that's why I felt it was important for us to use the Belhar. This is our confession, right? This is one thing that does unite us with Reformed Christians throughout the world. This is something as a denomination we took a tough vote on, about 2/3 of those folks saying this is going to be a framework for us. Those are the things at least we can point to that give ourselves some common language, and then those other pieces too of how we see ourselves being faithful. It really is it's almost 10:40, it's 10:38, and I need to get ready for worship. So thank you so much for the
Thank you. That's great. Wow, there's so much going through my head. I think about the time when my grandson was just entering preschool in their new home in Pittsburgh, and they were studying the fruits of the Spirit they discovered in his Presbyterian preschool. And one day, his mom was kind of frustrated in the kitchen and said something. And he turned around and looked at her at 3 years of age and said, "Well, that wasn't very patient." And I'm like, yeah, out of the mouths of babes. And our children do remind us and do teach us. And they are a part of the reason we feel strongly about this and do what we do. I said yesterday, walking around on River Street, I'm like, I think we could have had a congregational meeting here. We express our faith and live out our faith, and that is, so good to see. I can let you know a couple things forthcoming that you may be interested in. I can let you know that February 8 and 15, if you'd like to write that on your calendar, Lynn Jappinga is going to be here to talk about Christian nationalism. She's been doing a lot of research about the history, etc., and so she is scheduled for February 8 and 15. Our year, by the way, is just about full, so there's lots of good things coming, but that's one you will definitely want to make note of. I will let you know that next week, Jeff Chu will be here to talk about his book, Good Soil. Readers Group discussed it this past Wednesday. We had a good discussion. If you want to talk about love becoming anger, you can read Jeff's book. Jeff shares a lot about his life, interwoven with a lot about his Chinese heritage, about his talking about division in the family, about his parents' rejection of him when he came out as gay and married his partner. And so that he covers much in his book, and he will be here next week to talk about that. So I hope you join us then too. But thank you. It's 10:40 and it's time to get ready for worship. Thank you.